Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman, for your for being here and for sharing your thoughts with us. I have a fair number of questions, but I really want to start off with a sort of global question. I think so many people have seen the House Financial Services Committee as one that has, at least in the past, disproportionately favored the voices of the financial services industry instead of the voices of people who are supposed to be served by the financial services industry. And I was struck by the breadth of your agenda and the many areas of, many diverse areas from international to domestic issues. But I guess I would just love to get your perspective on that difference, on the focus on consumers, and the focus of where you started your remarks, middle-class families, and how they are served or ill-served by industry, and the break that you see going forward.
Well, Anira, I talked a bit about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and I consider that the centerpiece of the Dodd-Frank reforms. What we discovered was that there was no real agency focused on consumers, looking out for consumers. Consumers really didn't have anywhere to turn. Of course, there was no focus, and so consumers found that they really could not effectively deal with these financial services agencies and with the big banks and financial institutions. And so creating the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was very important, and it has been very effective. And as we know, Mick Mulvaney came with his direct intent to undermine and destroy the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It was the most hated agency by the former chairman of the committee, and the Republicans, of course, on the opposite side of the aisle. They called him up time and time again. They berated him. They tried to break him down, but he was very strong. He stood up. He worked for the consumers. And now consumers know that there can be, and there has been something in government to look out for their interests. And we have got to restore their faith in that possibility by making sure that we undo the harm that Mulvaney has done.
That's great. Thank you so much, because obviously that has been a real concern over the last several years. And I'm not sure how many jobs Mick Mulvaney has at this point, but it's like 5 too many. So I wanted to just pick up on a few pieces. You've outlined a rich housing agenda.
That's right.
And I noted one area you discussed, which is rental housing and lack of affordability.
Yes.
Your state, California, the new governor, has addressed housing affordability as a major issue. That's obviously a real crisis in cities around the country. And I think it's also just a breath of fresh air for the House Financial Services Committee to actually focus on housing, which has been in a way that's helpful to consumers. But how do you see the specific issue of rental, ensuring that middle-class families can afford rent and mortgages as you go?
Well, one of the things that we discovered after 2008, while we focused an awful lot on what was happening with our big banks and financial institutions and the foreclosures that were taking place, the families that were losing their homes, was that they had to look for rental housing. And of course, they discovered that not enough rental housing was available, and then the price of rental housing was increasing. And the price of rental housing was increasing because the hedge funds got into the business. And when the hedge funds got into the business, they were able to buy up large quantities of housing that we consider, for the most part, pennies on the dollar, because they were buying such large amounts. And instead of putting those houses back on the market, they turned them into rental housing. And of course, they began to raise the rents. They have not invested in repair and upgrading in those housing. And so we have people now who are being displaced and put out of the rental housing because of the increase in rents. We need to develop more affordable housing. As you know, Dodd-Frank, Barty-Frank rather, and I and others worked on the fund, the National Housing Trust Fund. And we were supposed to get those dollars from the GSEs as they paid off their debt and they were realizing profits. We felt that some of that money should go into development of low-income housing. But as it turns out, at the time, the guy who headed the FHFA, decided that money should just go back into the general fund. And so we lost a great portion of that money. But it costs money. You cannot do it without resources.
Yeah.
And so I'm committed, as I've said, to a huge bill on homelessness, 13.9, I believe, billion dollars. We've got to do that. And we've got to work closely with those who are interested in developing low-income housing to ensure that they get some help from our government to do that.
That's fantastic. I wanted to turn to another area that you raised, which is diversity, and the news of creating a new subcommittee, which is really exciting. We've done a lot of work at CAP over the last several years about how diverse boards and diverse companies are more profitable, as you pointed out. Other countries have had systems of quotas, but obviously, even in our country, we don't have any, there's no requirement of reporting. What do you see as the agenda on this issue? I think just even the fact that you're talking about it has made some real changes. Companies are already responding just by the prioritization. So I really want to commend you for that. But as you see us going forward, or you see the committee going forward, how do you see that work? How do you see that work of actually making America's companies actually reflect the country itself?
Well, as you just alluded to, the discussion. Opening up this discussion is extremely important. In addition to that, I think that this subcommittee must do some very basic initial work of compiling the data, compiling the information about what is really going on in not only the financial services community, but in our country with major corporations. I recently took a visit to Silicon Valley, where I was able to visit some of the technology firms. And of course, there's been a lot of talk about the lack of diversity in the technology funds, but I was really a bit shocked to find out that it was so bad, that there were so few minorities and particularly blacks and Latinos that had been hired in these industries. And so it is important for our subcommittee to compile the information, to get the data, to show what is going on. This will not only help people to understand the importance of the discussion, but it will also help the industries reflect on what they have not done. The other thing I think that we need to do with the Diversity Committee is to help talk about outreach and how to bring people into these industries. Oftentimes, we have the excuses that are made that, well, we had this opening, or we have these openings, but we couldn't find the qualified people, and we can't find the qualified minorities. Well, that excuse won't work anymore. It won't work anymore because we know that there are so many young people and millennials who are out there who have gone to school, who have graduated, who are creative, who are looking for careers, and they are finding that they're getting lost in these systems where you simply apply on the internet and someone sits and they look at the applications and they decide which ones fit the profile of that job that is being sought you know, to get someone to fill. Now, I know that this doesn't work because my grandson got one of those jobs looking at the applications. He had just graduated from college. He didn't know what the hell he was doing. And so a lot of those...
I won't tell him what you said.
Oh, he knows. I tell him all the time. We laugh about it. And some of those applications got put aside. And that's not how to do it.
Yeah.
We have to come up with new systems.
Yeah.
We know that technology is extremely important. We know the internet is important. You don't have the old unemployment offices where you go in and you sit down and fill out an application. But we think that a lot more can be done to make sure that people have an equal chance to present themselves and to show what they can do and be able to talk face to face with someone. And so we're going to be talking about how to increase discussion in ways by which to do that kind of outreach and to provide these opportunities. Those are just some of the things that we're going to do. The other thing that we have to do is we have to convince people who have been turned down for so long that it's a new day. And things are happening. Don't give up, because a lot of young people get turned off and they stop trying. And many of them try and figure out how they can maybe start a business themselves, and then they turn to the banks and there's no access to capital. And so I think that we can encourage young people, our millennials in particular. Number one, don't give up. Number two, we're also working with fintechs, and I'm still working with the banks about access to capital. So this is a kind of work that we want to do, and it's the kind of work that really has not been done effectively in the past. You talk about housing, and you talk about diversity. You talk about issues that this committee has not been focused on. This was known as the Juice Committee. There's no more juice in this committee.
There's juice now. There's juice now.
In this committee, we're going to have a committee that's focused on these issues to see what we can do to strengthen families, to strengthen our young people who are coming out of college, to make sure that these families have the benefit of the earnings that they are making and that they don't get ripped off and reduce their ability to have a decent quality of life. So if you take a look at our new committee, you will see that it is diverse. We have a lot of new people on the committee, people who have come, having expressed in their campaigns what they care about, that they care about looking out for families. They care about making sure that our big financial institutions are held accountable. And so they didn't just start thinking about this coming onto the committee. They wanted to come onto the committee. They know many of these issues, and they're prepared to fight for our families.
Amen, sister. I know we only have time for a few more questions, so I'll get to just two really important ones. One, you started off the discussion on really the Trump administration's assault on Dodd-Frank and other ways in which we basically, as a country, went through the great financial crisis, and then the Congress responded. The congressional response was the Dodd-Frank Act, amongst other things. The Dodd-Frank Act actually relies on a lot of regulatory infrastructure, much of which seems to be very weakened.
Yes.
I think one of the great challenges and concerns people have is that this administration creates crisis day after day after day and seems ill-equipped to deal with the next crisis, while they're attacking the means by which we would protect consumers in the next crisis. So I think accountability was such a huge part of the midterm elections. And how do you see, or could you just describe more how you see the committee's role in the backdrop of an administration that seems ill-prepared for challenges, seems basically catering to the industry? How are you going to protect consumers so we don't have another financial crisis again?
Well, this administration has demonstrated that that's not something they care about. That's not on their agenda.
Yeah.
You know, protecting families and making sure that we have the kind of consumer protection that people can rely on. They have not been interested in that at all. So simply by introducing the legislation from my side of this committee will be new and refreshing and will help people understand that we're defining who we are and what we care about, and we're acting on it. So we're not relying on this administration for much of anything. I will work with those on the opposite side of the aisle who want to work on issues that we are alluding to. But of course, if they don't, I have the gavel. And so we're going to we're going to introduce our legislation. We're going to take it to the floor, and we're going to get it passed. We're going to do everything that we can to work very closely with the Senate. And of course, I believe that the Senate is going to join with us on many of these bills, with a few Republicans adding on, and then we're going to send it to whoever is president at the time. And of course, the president has the option of vetoing our bills, but of course, we have the option of overturning a veto.
Absolutely.
And so we're in this to fight and to work hard and not back down, and to ensure that the American people know that there's another way of looking at their government. Right now, you're right. We have crisis after crisis. Mm-hmm. We have a dysfunctional White House. They cannot be depended on. You don't know what you're going to wake up to the next day. And at some point in time, even those who are standing with this president are going to have to walk away because even with the shutdown, as I have said over and over again, many of these people who supported him, it's going to be hard for them to stick with him when they can't pay the rent, when the car is repossessed, when the children need shoes. They're going to have to realize that they have to do something different, and that they cannot rely on this president or this administration.
So my final question is on an issue you raised, which is access to capital. We know that for every $1 of wealth a black family owns, a white family has $10. So the racial wealth gap is really a crisis in the country. And research shows that factors like income and education don't actually protect against the wealth gap. So in other words, basically, African Americans with high education still have lower wealth levels than their white counterparts. So access to capital has been one of the historic ways in which the wealth gap has really grown. And so I think one of the really critical aspects of the new committee and the outlook is addressing issues that haven't really been at the forefront of the financial services industry. How do you see that issue as part of your agenda?
Well, you're absolutely correct about what has happened on this issue of access to capital. Housing is extremely important as we discuss access to capital. First of all, to get into a home, oftentimes you will have the kind of appreciation that will allow you to gain resources and capital by which to invest in opportunities. And so paying attention to housing is extremely important. Aside from that, it's the American dream. You know, we are raised and reared believing that if you're going to be a real productive, involved citizen, you got to own a home. I don't know if that's absolutely true, but it is something that we have internalized. And so housing is extremely important, and it's important in building resources and the ability to gain the kind of resources that will allow you to invest. The other thing that we have discovered is plain old discrimination, period. One of the things that we discovered as we looked into the crisis of 2008 at what was happening with these foreclosures was that people of color, minorities, were charged higher interest rates, despite the fact They earned the equal amount of money as whites. They had equal amount of education. They paid their bills, adequately, but they were discriminated against. Every time you are discriminated against in the way that people charge you for goods and services, it reduces your ability to have the funds that you need to have a better quality of life. And so we've got to deal with discrimination and exclusion. That's why this diversity committee, and we are working to close the wealth gap if we can. One of the things that we are told, that it is so big now, it will never be closed, but we can do better. And we're going to work very hard at doing that.
Thank you so much. I really have to we're so grateful to host your speech at the Center for American Progress. And I want to just say, over many years, you have been a really fearless leader and a champion for so many people who don't have a voice in politics. And the idea that you are Madam Chairwoman of the Financial Services Committee is an incredible breath of fresh air. So thank you for your leadership and thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.